All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Let's get started. Thanks all for joining, and I hope everyone at home is healthy and managing to maintain some level of sanity. My name is Barbara Bachelum, and I will be doing the webinar today. We are going to hold all the questions till the end because we're recording this so that people can see it at a later point. So just if you have questions, you can either send them through the chat pane or hold them till the end, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So my hope for this webinar, managing change in crisis is a, is a huge topic. If I were doing this as a workshop, it could be a day, it could be a week. And I'm trying to share the key points in about 45 minutes. So my hope for today is not that you absorb every single thing that I'm sharing, but that as you're listening, there might be some key points that either you had not considered previously or resonate in particular with you and they're issues that you want to deal with. So don't try to absorb everything. Take it in passively and try to see, what are the key points that might be of most value to you. In addition to this webinar, because it is short and it's a very big topic and we probably won't be able to answer everybody's questions, feel free to contact me. My email will be on the last slide. Feel free to contact me and I'm more than happy to set up like an hour free brainstorm consultation with you about your specific issues that you're having if you need that. So thanks for joining. So first of all, I wanted to thank the co-hosts, Building Green and Built Environment Plus, for getting the word out. Sustainable Performance Institute is my organization. I'm the executive director. And Building Green, if you don't know Building Green, you should know Building Green because their resources are the best ones out there. You should subscribe, you should use Lead User, you should be part of the Sustainable Design Leaders group or one of the other companion groups. So definitely, if you are not already a Building Green community member, sign up now. And Built Environment Plus is the new name, new brand of the USGBC Massachusetts chapter. They are co-hosting this event today, and I'm the board chair of that organization. For those of you tuning in from Massachusetts, today is the town hall meeting at 4 o'clock, which is an opportunity to kind of give us a sense of what you want, what you need, what's going on, and how we can serve you. So you should also check, Built Environment Plus is now doing a bunch of trainings and webinars nationally. So check out their website and see what's being offered. In terms of background, I just want to, for those of you who don't know me and are wondering maybe, why am I doing this webinar and what do I know about this topic? Before architecture, my background was in social psychology, and after 12 years in architecture, mainstream practice, in 1998, I started a nonprofit whose mission was to make green building mainstream. And since 1998, which is a very long time now, all of our work has been about institutionalizing sustainability and now resilience within organizations. And what I quickly learned is that even though the focus of my work has been sustainability, as Lance Hosey once said and wrote about extensively, it's not about the technology and the strategies. It's about the people, and it's about change and managing change and doing things differently. So really my work over time, though still focused on sustainability, has really kind of turned inside out and has been all about change management. And I've been working with architecture, engineering, construction companies, with owners, with local governments, corporations. So what I'm sharing with you today is both kind of academic knowledge from what I've learned over the years about change management, as well as my own experiences working with companies and my own experience as a leader in my own organization. And one of the stories that I'm going to use as kind of a thread to wrap concepts around is an experience I had in the last recession, which we all lived through, where one of the businesses that we had under our umbrella was a Nexus Green Building Resource Center. And weathering that storm it was a small business, 20 full-time people, 10 interns, but we had a floor in an office building downtown in Boston. And the experience of riding out that storm with successes and failures and many lessons learned are also part of what I'm going to bring into today's conversation. So in terms of the flow of today, just did a little bit of introduction and background about who am I and why am I talking to you about this. I want to talk about who is it that manages change, touch on crisis management and change management. What's the difference? What are we talking about? How is change management different on a normal day and during this pandemic? And then dig into the strategies and principles and hopefully have robust time for Q&A. This webinar goes till 2. I am happy to stay on for a little bit longer for anyone who wants to have more discussion. And as I said earlier, anyone who's on this webinar today and has specific issues or challenges that they want to talk about, feel free to email me. My email will be at the end of this webinar, and we can set up a time to talk just about your own issues. So feel free to, take advantage of that. Great. So we're going to turn off the video of my face so it's not kind of interrupting the slides, but then I'll pop back on later. I appreciate you all logging on today. So the first question is, who? Who is it that is the audience for managing change and crisis? Well, obviously, it is the executive leadership of a company. That's, the buck stops there. That's the top, and that's the most important responsibility in terms of steering the ship. But it's not just the executive leadership, it's anyone who's leading anything. So leading teams, leading business units. People often are leading from behind. Most people who contact me are leading from the middle. So leaders at all levels are definitely all experiencing different challenges, and their skills to address those challenges are all part of this. Even if you're not leading anything anywhere, you're part of a team. And in that experience, you will often have issues. Maybe the leader of your team is doing things that are not helping you or are causing problems, and you have to address it. That's kind of a fractal, like an embedded leadership challenge to yourself as an individual. So first of all, it doesn't matter if you are the boss or if you are a middle manager or if you are none of those. It is important to understand these concepts so that you can participate for the greater good of the organization. So crisis management. Now I'm getting into what's the difference between crisis and change. So crisis management is all about stopping the bleeding. How do we keep the ship afloat, keep sailing, and maintain or return to the status quo? Most of the literature and wisdom in business up until now has been all about, in terms of crisis, has been about, we were here, things blew up, how do we get back here? The difference with change management is you're not looking only at the status quo, you're looking at the long term. And someone in the last webinar asked, what about these things that you're doing now should really last into the long term? And I think that is the crux in my philosophy between change management and crisis management. Crisis says, let's maintain or return to the status quo. Change management is all about identifying where you want to be going, what is the best optimal place where you can be thriving as an organization, and how do you get there? So one of the big differences between crisis and change is looking at root causes, and as well as trying to learn how can your organization transform as you're moving forward, and what are the things that you're doing during this crisis that can become institutionalized as a way to raise your organization to the next level, not just keep your head above water, but really thrive. And it's kind of the question, how much better than the status quo do we want the future to be? Now, in my experience, when I work with organizations about sustainability and institutionalizing sustainability, what I find is most of the time, the work that we're doing together is really integrated with all kinds of other fundamental organizational capabilities: communication, knowledge management, leadership effectiveness, team effectiveness. So even though sustainability, in my personal experience, has been the door into an organization to help them achieve a specific objective, it's kind of a thread that pulls on all these other things, because if you have ineffective leadership, it doesn't matter what you do, you will never achieve your sustainability goals. The same thing with managing in crisis. There are going to be things that define your organization right now that are not optimal, and ignoring those fundamental conditions and trying to just put your finger in the dike is not going to serve you as well. The other difference between change management and crisis management is a focus on people. Now, of course, when you're managing a crisis, you care about the people. But one of the really important things about change management is how you engage people in the process, as opposed to more of a top-down command and control, a small group of people in a room make decisions and roll them out, which tends to be a profile of ways that many organizations manage crisis. So back to my little character that was on my opening slide. Here's the pivotal point. Looking at crisis as an opportunity, and JFK is famous as quoting this character, is saying that crisis and opportunity are intertwined in the same thing. That's not what this character really means, but let's just say, since JFK made it so popular, that's what we're talking about. And for me, I think that makes the difference between just managing a crisis and managing a crisis so you can thrive after the crisis is over. In change management, one of the key principles is go slow to go fast. Even if you as executive leaders in an organization know what, quote, the answers are, or how you want to roll something out, if you try to do that without engaging people, what you find is a lack of buy-in, resistance, challenges. So in normal change management, what you want to do is take the time to engage people to be co-creators in the solution. Now, obviously, in a crisis, one of the things you don't have is that luxury. But one of the key mindset framings that I want to reiterate really strongly is, as you're facing a crisis, you can't let panic rule the entire day. You have to also be looking at the decisions we're making today. How do they transform our organization positively in the years to come? So it's really, as with, I think, many, many things, all about mindset. Thinking beyond the panic to long-term resilience, and what will success look like in the future? And let's face it, folks, this is not the last crisis. I really hope that we don't have a resurgence of this pandemic in November. And even if we don't, pretty sure we're heading towards a recession. And again, it won't be our last crisis. So as a leader in an organization, a key question is that how can the decisions you make now help make your organization more resilient going into the future and dealing with future crises? So this really daylights opportunities to address underlying and systemic issues that made your company less resilient now. It's important to take a beat somewhere, somehow, with some colleagues in or out of your organization and think about what is it that has been pulling us back or pulling us down or made us less resilient. Maybe it's your IT infrastructure. Maybe it's your corporate culture. People don't feel valued. People don't collaborate. These are things that, first of all, you can't ignore when you're trying to solve the crisis problem. And second of all, will help make your organization more resilient and more successful moving forward. So change management, the title of this is Managing Change in Crisis. And really, change management is something that is a constant in business. You're always managing changes, whether it's a timesheet or a merger and acquisition or anything along the spectrum, you're always managing change. Now, from my observations, again, having worked with the design profession and outside of the design profession, some corporations, universities, local governments, I will tell you that my observation is that in particular, architecture firms are pretty bad at this. In my mind, as a past design professional, change is a design problem. And also organizations are a design problem. But what I've seen in many, many architecture firms is whenever there's a change that's happening, many architecture firms are not very careful, thoughtful, mindful about what the process for change should be. And as it is an ongoing thing, it's really important, but it's been haphazard. So managing change is a design problem. It includes how you engage people, how you track your progress, what are the feedback loops. And I'm going to be drawing, when I get to the strategies, I'm going to be drawing from all of the classic frameworks, which some of you, especially if you have been to business school, are familiar with: Cotter, Lewin, Bridges, Leith Sharp, and Bachelum. I'm also including things that I've been developing over the years as I work with this, and I'm going to be pulling from those things to touch on key points that should be helpful for you. So there's change management, which should be a constant in business, and it's a discipline that anyone in business should be kind of growing their muscles in. And then there's change in crisis. And I thought about this, and I thought about, change management efforts in general over the past couple of years in my work have been, for example, helping firms integrate a focus on zero energy or energy performance. One specific example is helping a firm get every project team to set energy use intensity targets, track them, and achieve them. And that is a massively challenging problem in larger firms. And that's just your normal everyday change management problem. Now, when you're looking at crisis and how do we manage people when we are quarantined, I thought about the process for both of those things. And what I realized was there's really only three differences. One, if you're Joe Architecture or Jane Architecture firm and you have not been trying to, you're not an AIA 2030 signatory, you've not been trying to reduce carbon or energy, then you have to almost fabricate urgency. I mean, the urgency is there in terms of climate, but what you need to do is really make urgency palpable and real to people so that it's a perceived urgency. So there's actually quite a lot of time and effort and process just around making things urgent to people. You have to understand their interests. You may have to create kind of coalitions of champions who are on the same page but represent different parts of hierarchy or organization. Obviously, in a pandemic or in any other crisis, urgency is obvious. We know what the urgency is. However, the difference between crisis and change is you also can't forget about the previous urgencies that you had prioritized in your company. And for those of us on the call, I assume that climate or dealing with carbon and energy are one of those things that are still an urgency. But that's the big difference. You don't have to spend as much time and energy in positioning the effort under an umbrella of urgency and clarity about what that urgency is. The next thing that I mentioned briefly is the amount of time it takes and the pace. For anyone who's read Atul Gawande's book, Checklist Manifesto, or BEST, or any of the others, he talks about managing this in healthcare and trying to reduce infection rates in a hospital by increasing hand washing. And to make a very long story short, one of the ways that was most successful was instead of just telling people you need to hand wash and putting up memos everywhere, They engaged people in small multidisciplinary groups. They stated the problem and they asked people to come up with the solutions, even though they knew what the solutions were. But that created buy-in and led to a very high success rate. In this pandemic, we don't have the luxury of, oh, let's, take a year and engage people and talk about the solutions and all that. We don't have that luxury, but that also doesn't mean that you can skip that entirely and expect success. So I'll touch back on that. You still have to engage people. And then fundamentally, it's really people who are at the crux of everything and engaging the people. Now, you and I, all of you and I know that even in vanilla days where there's no pandemic and no crisis, people don't exactly love change. It's really against human nature. People may say they want change, but when it comes down to it, it's very hard to change behavior. It's very hard to leave your comfort zone. And the same is true, especially in a pandemic. Now, most change has a process very similar to grief in an organization. You're going to end a behavior and you're going to try and introduce a new behavior, and the transition can be very challenging. There's denial and shock and anger until you kind of hit that neutral zone and build things up, which is a whole other webinar and workshop into itself. But pandemics and crises also have their own timeline, and that timeline is dictated partly by the concrete issues of the crisis, but also even more so by the human condition and human response. There's a warning, as we had. There's the threat. Then there's when that threat becomes actually real. And then there's panic, and there's coming to terms with it. And then there's the aftermath. So we have to keep in mind that, especially as leaders in an organization, there is an urgency to address these things in a certain pace. But we have to recognize that people are behind the curve often. Leaders have to make decisions very quickly, but the staff in the organization can't keep up with that pace without going through their own internal process. So it's just an important thing to recognize. All right, so now I want to transition into kind of a smorgasbord of the key points around managing change and crisis that I want to focus on. Again, I said this at the beginning, I'm going to go through all these, and my intention isn't that you absorb them all, but kind of listen, take it in, and see what key points are the ones that are most relevant to you and the ones that most resonate with what you're struggling with or what you think is important. So it's kind of drinking from a fire hose, which is what that image is, that image, by the way, is from MIT in this data center, which is pretty funny and ironic as a Boston native. And before I get into those, I just want to make a point again that all of the things that define the functions in your organization and its success, the effectiveness of leadership, the effectiveness of teams and collaboration, your skills, communication, knowledge management, all of those things are brought into stark contrast in a crisis. If your leadership sucks and nobody respects the leader and the leader is not effective, obviously that's a problem. If you have bad communication, if you have a culture that is disempowering and people don't feel valued, all of those things are going to become 10 times magnitude problems in a crisis. So part of managing in a crisis is somehow getting an understanding of your baseline and understanding what are your key weaknesses. And I'm not, all the strategies and things that I'm going to talk about, my intention is not that you go on a corporate retreat or spend months and months thinking about these. It's processing these things quickly, but being intentional about it. And not just using your gut, but trying to base these things on data. So a crisis will put a spotlight on your existing weaknesses, and thriving in the future means you need to address them as part of how you're dealing with this. So if collaboration has been really awful in your company in the past, you really need collaboration to happen now to figure out how to solve problems. So now's your opportunity to figure out what are the best ways that we can improve collaboration. Is it figuring out who needs to be part of small groups of problem solving. Is it timing and pacing? There are different ways of managing it, but those are the questions you have to ask. Okay, so the strategies and key concepts break down into five. I've broken them down into 5 categories. And to be completely honest, this is a work in progress. I really wanted to put this webinar out here because of the times that we're struggling in. And I'm kind of driving the car as I'm paving the road. Here's how I've broken things down. And I'm going to be working on an article, and it might look a little different in the future, but these are the things that are important. I mentioned earlier my own experience in the last recession of having the Nexus Green Building Resource Center in downtown Boston with 20 full-time staff, 10 interns, $30,000 a month rent, you know, small business, but had to weather that storm. And I'm going to try and use that story as I'm talking about these things. So leadership is about behavior. How do you manage, how do you deal with external relationships, internal relationships, and honestly, from my experience, oh my God, managing your own stress. I think the recession and Nexus, which ultimately had to close down, but did transform our organization incredibly, I think that my stress took probably a year to 18 months to really resolve itself, my own personal stress. So that obviously is a key factor for leaders, managing their own stress. Your temptation is to put your head down and just plow forward and like try to figure things out and not leave people off, etc. You have to think about how you're communicating, which I'll get into, the content, the pace, the repetition. You have to look at what your people need, whether it's physical, emotional, or social support. You have to look at your collaboration and what processes you have. And I don't know if the same person is on this webinar that was on the last one who asked the question about what lasts, like what from this crisis process do you pull into the future? And there isn't one answer to that. I could have that conversation happily separately, but a high level answer to that is it depends on what your Achilles heels are now and where you want your organization to be after this in a resilient manner. So first of all, leadership. This is, my focus here is on behavior. When I realized that Nexus, that our main revenue streams for Nexus were evaporating and evaporating at a very quick pace. The first thing I had learned from my colleague, Guy Saperstein, who did the last webinar, is that the most important thing for people is that they have a sense of safety, predictability, and some level of perceived control in their lives. If you take away one of those legs on the stool collapses for people. They become unproductive, they spin their wheels, and they don't know how to manage. So as a leader, your primary responsibility is to figure out how to convey and give those tangible things to people in ways that are important to them. You also can't let panic rule the day. You still have to lead from a place of vision. You know, when Boeing's planes crashed and the FAA grounded all of their planes, they could look at, you know, how do we get planes off the ground? Or they could message to their people and to their customers, Boeing is going to be the safest airplane manufacturing company in the world. You know, that's our vision for the future, and how are we going to get there? How are you going to be resilient in the next crisis? Now, there are a couple of things that are important in leaders. First of all, your leadership style. Every leader has kind of a dominant style, just like you have a dominant right or left hand. And people tend to react in different situations with different styles. Now, you may have a more collaborative style naturally, or you may be more of a dictator. The important thing is, first of all, your emotional intelligence. Be aware of what your style is, and be aware of how people perceive your style. And you need to modulate your style depending on what people need. And that requires feedback loops. I know as a leader with the whole Nexus implosion, what I thought I was presenting to people was not what people were seeing. And that was a painful learning point to me. But luckily I had amazing staff, and they were not shy about giving me feedback, and I invited it, and I learned an incredible amount about that. Situationally responsive, in quotes, I lost my best architect and got my worst manager, which is a quote I've heard a lot. That's about being responsive to what people need. So a person who was a project manager in the past and they were great, but now their project's on hold and you're reassigning them to a different function, they may not be good in that function. So one of the things you have to do is understand and ask people what their strengths are, where their comfort is. And you need to be supporting them in their role to help make them be as much of a positive contributor as possible. You also can't forget your core values. Like, for example, if collaboration is a key core value in your organization in crisis, that doesn't become less important, it becomes more important. And you need to reinforce that in how you're speaking to people, what decisions you're making, not having profit centers be divisive amongst different business units within a corporation, but have collaboration required for that reward. And the last thing is, if there is bad behavior, you need to address it. Way too often I see organizations where bad behavior is tolerated for a long time. And of course, good behavior needs to be rewarded, partly to keep morale up, and also to share with other people what's important for that. Communication. So first and foremost, I think this is the hardest thing. I know with Nexus, in my experience, it was, and with my clients, transparency. Now, when I say transparency, I don't mean, vomit everything to all your staff, because first of all, that won't make them feel safe or have control. But you need to have an appropriate level of transparency. You have to figure out where that boundary is. In the beginning, we didn't know if we'd have to lay off people. We didn't know if we'd have to dock part of people's salaries for a period of time. But our transparency approach was to say, okay, we're uncertain about where the future is taking us. Here are the options that we are looking at. Here is the process that we're undertaking to evaluate those options. Here's the information that we need to make those decisions. And also, here are the people amongst the staff that are contributing to making those decisions. So sometimes transparency isn't about complete open book, complete like everyone in on every decision, but it's more to give people a sense of how are we managing this, how are we navigating this, and how are decisions being made, but also keeping to those decisions. You can't tell staff, here's how a decision is going to be made and here's whose input we need, and then undermine them and not follow what you say. You need to follow what you say. Communication needs to be frequent, but not overwhelming, and keep it concise. You also have to recognize neurodiversity and different modalities. You have to communicate through multiple channels. Through Zoom, through email, through a web page that keeps the updates so people can check on their own time. And you have to be very clear about your expectations for behavior, for communication. And again, don't let panic rule the day. Now, there's a whole hour I could spend on talking about culture and organizational culture. But one of the things I want to say is, if your culture was not great before, this is an opportunity. Anything in leadership, teams, communication that you do that is new, culture is not set in stone. It does transform. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your baseline and where you are now and where you want to be more resilient in the future. People, again, safety, predictability, control. Now, predictability is not necessarily, it can be, we meet Mondays at 12, so we're going to keep meeting Mondays at 12. That is a form of predictability. It's not the only kind of predictability. Predictability is just people know what to expect. So you can say, my kids, thank God, have online school, or else there'd be mayhem behind me. But the teachers and the school let us know, here's how we will be conducting classes. Here's what to expect. That's what people need. So obviously, first and foremost, you have to be able to continue operationally functioning. What does that mean? What do people need? And that's an important, when I talked about change management and engaging people, it is important to engage people in those solutions in a rapid way. So maybe it's, heads of business units or managers of different studios, or, somehow breaking down and distributing and delegating so that you can have channels of feedback loops so that people can tell you what they need in order to function and contribute the best. And then you make your decisions. You need, especially in times like this in a pandemic, you really need to focus on morale and group cohesion. And that may mean doing, instead of the 12-person meeting that happens once a week, maybe that happens once every 2 weeks, and there are 3-person meetings that happen in between, because a 12-person Zoom meeting doesn't have the same cohesion as a 3-person meeting. That may not be true for you, but what you need to consider is how people are communicating, connecting, feeling cohesion, and not losing morale. Introverts, my son's in college, he's a total introvert, totally thrilled that he doesn't have to go to classes and loving his studies. My other son, who's a total extrovert, shrivels if he doesn't have interaction. So different people need different kinds of things to boost their morale and feel part of a cohesive group. The feedback loops that I mentioned, those are really key. Flexibility. I was talking to a friend and colleague the other day, and was saying that one of the things that her company did was give people flexibility, and this may not be possible for everyone, but just it is as an example, gave people flexibility week by week to decide how many hours they could work. Now, people are home with their kids and family members and cows and sheep and whatever is in their life. And they may have a week that is going to be really hard. So this company let people decide between 20 hours a week and 40 hours a week, how many hours they're going to work from week to week. And they just submit their timesheets and they get paid, I guess, a prorated amount based on that. So it's important to kind of adapt a more, if your company culture is very rigid and bureaucratic, that may not serve you. It may, but it may not. So you need to think about that. And very importantly, you need to provide psychological support. Now, that could be a psychologist that you hire. It could be just a person or a group of people within your company, or if HR is truly HR and not just paperwork, it could be folks from HR who are identified clearly as kind of coaches or support, or call me if you're struggling, let me know. Those people are part of the feedback loops. You need to plan for that and figure out who can you task for that? Who do people feel comfortable sharing with? And then empowering people is always a key part of change, especially now. You need to signal to people, we've got to get our way out of this. Whoever has ideas, whoever has solutions, create feedback loops to figure out how that happens. And if people are leading change, or just leaders in general, one thing I see often in companies is that these leaders can be undermined frequently. They may have a title, but no real authority. If that is the case, that's really gonna screw you up. You can't undermine people. They have to be empowered and to contribute and help be part of the solution. Second to last, collaboration. Groups of people are not teams. I see this all the time, especially in design. And if I could see all of your little faces now, I'd want to see who's nodding. We are not super great in the building industry at creating actual teams. What we have is groups of people who are running towards a deadline and trying not to get sued and trying to whatever, keep their sanity. This is an opportunity to really build teams, which is part of culture, which is part of productivity, which is part of morale. And trust is a foundation of teams. Now, teams, I do full day, full week workshops on leadership and on team effectiveness and all that stuff. So clearly I'm not doing it justice here, but you need to think about using collaboration as a way for people to really have mutual accountability, build trust, share and manage conflict, and not focus only on the results, but also on the processes and the people who are part of it. Next is the mode of collaboration. Things that, and I think this could be a fantastic thing in the design community to really shake things up and disrupt things. Our process for delivering projects, don't even get me started. I do a lot of work with integrative design, and agility is really where we need to be going. We take way too long to make certain decisions with people not on the same page or in the same room who are responsible for co-creating that decision. And we need to adapt more of an agile software approach to problem solving in the short term and be looking at what of that can be lasting into the long term. So we need to give people ways to, especially in the early stages where you're trying to figure out how are we going to deliver our services or products to our customers, have people spend a little bit of time, if it's a week, if it's a few weeks, with kind of a hackathon mentality. Let people self-organize. Let people look at leadership is responsible for stating the problems, the challenges, and the objectives. Here's my vision. Here's where I want us to be. Here are the challenges that face us. How do you guys think we can solve this problem? And take, depending on the size of your company, take a step to kind of like, we need people's input from this division, this level in the organization, or that. But then you need to really kind of set the challenge and let people rise to it. And in terms of collaboration, there are always going to be people who are stellar team members and people who are less stellar team members. That's, again, some people thrive in certain roles and not in others. Some people, if a person is an introvert in a team of extroverts, they may shut down. So it's really important for a team leader, or really anyone in the team, to say, I see that you're struggling. How do you think you could better contribute to this? Or encourage people to say, and not be shy and not feel like they're going to get punished for saying, look, I'm really struggling with this. I feel like so-and-so would do a better job at this, but always encourage them to not just complain about how they're struggling, but offer a solution for what might make them be able to contribute in a better way. One of the models I mentioned before, the change management, there's Bridges and Lewin and Cotter and Sharp. Leith Sharp came up with this dual operating system model, which is one of my favorite things. And I just want to flash it here quickly to underline the importance of this dual operating system concept. So you have on the right command and control hierarchy. Every organization has some form of hierarchy. Usually it's pretty rigid. It's very clear who does what, hopefully. But innovation and problem solving doesn't happen easily within that hierarchy. So what you need is to create this kind of parallel dual operating system model where groups of people, like I just described, figuring out who you want or who self-selects to self-organize around solving a problem. One of the key important facets of this is de-risking. When you're in crisis, the last thing you can take on is inviting more risk. You already are grappling with enough risk. So if you're trying to figure out, okay, a lot of our architecture programs are shut down, but our planning is going strong. How do we shift our practice for now? How do we utilize more people? What can we do going into the future? That is where you break off a smaller group of people to do some hackathon, agile brainstorming, etc., which then feeds back into the hierarchy when it needs to get executed. So that, again, is 2 seconds on a much longer process, but I think it's a concept that's really important conceptually. Last but not least is processes. So again, one of the core concepts of change management, being intentional about designing your change, is engaging early. So going back to the vanilla everyday change management of getting every project team in a design firm to set and track EUI, you can't make decisions and then roll it out, because then you get zero traction. And I can count on my fingers and toes, well, no, I can't, how many firms have tried to do that and failed. So it's really before the beginning, if that makes any sense. So you need to start engaging people early, and that doesn't conflict with safety, predictability, and control, but it's about clarifying those expectations. Okay, we're going to change how we are managing projects because we can't have team meetings all the time for whatever reason. We still need to achieve objectives 1, 2, and 3. How do you think we would best do that? The other thing that's really important from a leadership perspective is to be outcome-based. Don't give people tasks as much as you clearly set your expectations for the outcomes that you want and let people figure out how to get there. That doesn't mean you can't veto something or not. The other thing is that processes need to have cross-functional, especially for quick problem solving. You need to have cross-functional and cross-hierarchical people who are part of the decision making. As you're managing your crisis, you need to understand what's your baseline. What are the things that are working for you? What are the challenges? You know, basically a SWOT. What are the threats, and how are you positioned currently to address those threats, and what are you missing? The next thing is you really need to do planning in scenarios, because there's so much uncertainty. There's no way, unless you decide, okay, we're shutting down the company, that's pretty damn certain, you're going to have a lot of uncertainty. So what you need to do is always be working on scenarios. Okay, we have scenario A, B, and C. This is optimistic, this is pessimistic, and this is somewhere in the middle. You need to plan, test, pilot, and challenging the process is another key concept in general change management. Certainly now, I think all we're doing is challenging our processes, right? We're living on Zoom. Excuse me. Challenging the process is almost being foisted upon us and not something we control. But it's an opportunity for innovation, which is one of those things that could be a long-lasting opportunity. And you also need to plan for short-term wins to keep up morale, to test things, to show people what can be achieved. And again, I want to come back to a point I made in the beginning. The difference between crisis and change management, or the melding of the two, is to be thinking in the background, what would have had to have been different in our company in order to have responded to this better? And think about that for the decisions you're making going into the long term. Understanding what those weaknesses are and what those strengths and opportunities are. For us in Nexus, although we ended up, we had processes where we were looking at, okay, what are our opportunities? Well, we have this amazing community. We have 20,000 people coming into the Nexus facility every year. We're really positioned in the design community. What if we were an incubator for green startups? That was one of the suggestions of the staff when we did this kind of agile brainstorming thing. And we tried that, and we piloted that, and that didn't take off because they were suffering too. But that led to us looking at, okay, what's our strength and where is the market now? And that was one of the pivots that contributed to us transforming into Sustainable Performance Institute, because we realized, okay, a big part of our business had been green building consulting. And when we started in 1998, we were kind of it. There were like maybe 5, 6 in the country. But by 2010, there were like 1 billion green consultants. So in terms of the market, it was pretty saturated, and we didn't need to do that anymore. And in addition, what we saw that was not being addressed was that project teams with green consultants would make improvements, but then people would go back to their organizations and it would be business as usual. And if we weren't in a crisis, we would not have thrown a light on the fact that what we really needed to focus on was organizational portfolio-wide change, which totally transformed our business and our focus, and actually led to a whole bunch of really positive things. So I've kind of, drinking from the fire hose, I've kind of blasted through a whole bunch of concepts, and we have 10 minutes left for questions. Again, I want to reiterate, if I haven't addressed something that is a challenge of yours, or if you just have a need to just talk or vent or brainstorm, shoot me an email, and happy to set up an hour-long call with you or a team of people to talk about it. And we have 10 minutes now. So I will, Casey can open up the video again. I'll leave this slide up, and oh, here we go. So you can actually feel like you're talking to a person. And let me see the chat pane if there are any questions. Again, I went through kind of my first take at distilling 20 years of experiences and academic information to try and share with you. So I know I didn't touch on everything. Okay, so question. I don't know if you all have visual, so I will read it out. What happens if I know I work for a company that doesn't have these practices? So this is something that I mentioned early on, that leaders are not necessarily titled leaders, but it could be anybody. So if you work for a company that doesn't have these practices, there are a few things that I would recommend. First of all, never be a lone wolf. Because unless you are in a position of influence yourself, you may not cut through all the noise. So what you need to do is what Cotter calls aligned coalitions. You need to figure out who besides you feels the same way, observes the same things. Try to include in that little cohort people who do have influence, either because they're great breadwinners or they have a position of authority, or something else. So first of all, create your group. Second of all, try to create what I'll call, for lack of a better term, your business case. You need to present to leadership what the issues are, that they don't have these practices, that they're fundamental issues that have always existed and are now going to pull you down even more. But you need to do it concisely with data and facts and with some suggestions. Leaders never like to just get a list of complaints. They want to know, what do you think we should do about it? And give them some tangible suggestions that, being aware of what they're dealing with and the crisis they're in, that are realistic suggestions. Happy to talk more about that, but so that's what I would say. Don't be by yourself. Get a group of people, some of whom have influence, maybe some clients, maybe not. And then present to your company, here are the problems, here's the impact on us and our productivity, here's the problems it creates, and here are some solutions we're thinking about, but we'd love to work with you and figure that out. So Rachel, if you want to chat more about that, I'm happy to. Another question was, can you give an example of a robust feedback loop? Okay, so feedback loops, gosh, can be so many different things. In processes, think of processes. If you're in design and you're designing a building, energy modeling could be one of those feedback loops where you're making a decision and you're testing it, and then you're getting results, and then you're testing again. That's kind of a design process or engineering feedback loop. You also need cultural feedback loops. If you don't have any, it may be very important to create them by saying, okay, for each of these 3 divisions in our company, here are the one individual who is going to be in contact with you and then relay back to leadership your progress, your challenges, your requests, but define what the channel for the feedback loop is, the frequency of that feedback, make it transparent, and what the expectations are. So I know that's kind of broad, but I'm thinking of different examples, and they're all very different in different sizes of companies and different kinds of feedback loops. They can be technical, they can be cultural, they can be financial. It's always amazing to me the lack of financial feedback loops in companies that you'd think would be a top priority. So it's tracking, so that kind of tracking. So there could be different ones. Rachel, I see your note. I'll get back to you about that. Any other questions about managing change in crisis? I touched on so many things so quickly. I would imagine that there are some. Again, I'll reiterate, feel free to contact me after. So managing change is a problem for companies in general, especially design companies, architecture, engineering, construction. So that needs to be something you carry on with after. Okay, two things. Groups of people are not teams. I came back to that idea in construction. People are often working together as groups of people because they're running after deadlines. Do I have suggestions to form teams in those situations? Oh man. So I do, I do workshops about that within companies that range from a day to a week. So I have plenty to say about that. Let me think. I can follow up and send you information. But in the short term, part of it is the ownership of the team. So if at a company level, if you can't transform that across all of the teams, you still have an opportunity to do that within your team. Part of it is being intentional and saying, look, we have this challenge as a team, and kind of using partnering actually. Bill Ronco wrote a book called Partnering. It's good to look at, but in essence, the first thing you do is kind of daylight people's concerns and people's challenges. And you say, because that's a part of building trust. So first of all, you can have non-threatening ways of people sharing with each other, either in personal topics, not too revealing, obviously, or in the context of the project. Start the project off by saying, okay, we have a challenging project. Here are the challenges. What other challenges do you think? And also getting to know people's personalities. Aside from neurodiversity, there are people who are introverts who hate talking in meetings, so you'll never get information from them, and that erodes team quality. So you have to get a sense, you know, whether it's Myers-Briggs or DISC, you can do quick kind of DISC evaluations, which gives people a common language to talk about themselves in a non-threatening way. So you can say, oh, Joe is very responsive in email, but will never return a call. Or Jane, you know, is great in meetings, but one-on-one isn't stimulated. So first of all, you have to daylight the challenges and the problems so that you feel like you're on the same page and in it together. You have to encourage people to work outside of their silos. You know, an engineer one time had the best solution for a construction problem. So it's developing that trust, developing mutual accountability, and ongoing support, so that if someone is struggling, like I mentioned before, they don't have to hide their struggle. They feel like because of the trust, they can bring it up. Maybe they have a personal issue. Maybe they're going through divorce. Maybe they have a professional issue and they don't understand how to solve a problem. They should feel comfortable either bringing it to the group, or if that's not going to be comfortable, knowing that there's someone they can turn to within the group to bring their problem, and that person can then bring it to the group. So fundamentally, it's really about building that trust and mechanisms for people to feel like they can count on each other. That's a quick answer to a multi-day workshop. Did that help at all? I can see your face, so you can just nod if... Okay, awesome. Let's see. Next, medium-sized group. How does leadership find out what staff are really thinking? Oh man, I hear you. Been there. I get a lot of nodding heads, but I wonder if I'm getting honest feedback. That was absolutely one of my biggest learning points, because I probably had similar size group to you, got a lot of nods. And And then one person happened to be brave enough to come to me and say, you know what, this sucks. And people don't like you, but you don't always get that. So if you are not the person, so you need to create, this is another feedback loop thing. First thing I would do is reveal your vulnerability in this, which is another team cohesion thing. You need to say to your staff, look, I don't know if I know how you're feeling. I want to support you. I want you to be happy. I get a lot of nodding, but I don't know if I'm getting honest feedback. So first of all, I think it's important to reveal your own vulnerability and your own thought process, at the same time not expecting that people will actually still respond to that. So then you have to offer up a suggestion and open up for their suggestion. So you can say, you know, here's what I want. I want to know that you're not just nodding. If you don't feel comfortable giving feedback to me, person X is the person you can talk to. And that person will, you know, keep your confidences, but then give me generalized feedback. So you can deputize someone for that. So you can make that suggestion, but then you can say, here's the problem. As the leader, I'm not sure if I'm getting good feedback. Here's my suggestion. I deputize this person to be your feedback person. Do you have other suggestions? What might work better for you? So revealing some level of vulnerability and transparency to them is important. Second of all, making a suggestion is helpful. And then third of all, inviting them to give you suggestions about what would work for them is also really helpful. Hopefully, and I'm happy to talk to you more about that because I've been there and that's a hard one, but that should help. And you got good people, so someone will have good ideas. Oh, another question. If there are leaders where I work and the CEO keeps pushing all the issues and feedback back to managers, but they always say they don't have time to email me or change the subject and give more workloads, simply look for another job. Well, you can always look for another job, but right now it might be hard to find. Yeah, that is definitely an issue. I'm trying to process the question and think of the answer at the same time. It is really hard for leaders and managers who have things in their face like payroll to think of other things, but it is important. And again, I think it's critical that it's not just you. If it's just you, you're easy to ignore, even if you're a super squeaky wheel. When I'm trying to make payroll and I'm not sure that I will, and I don't want to lay people off, your issues may or may not come to the fore. So you need to create a squeaky enough wheel and a critical mass of a number of people who are saying, hey, here's our issue. Either let us solve it and give you suggestions, or you need to spend half an hour with us on the phone on Wednesday to talk about this. If it's a clear and distinct solution that you're trying to engage them with, that's more helpful than just a general, here are the issues and, you know, I'm struggling with this. If they know that, okay, we can solve this in a half an hour call, or at least start solving it, and it's affecting multiple people, then it becomes more of a, it might become more of a kind of come to the fore enough for someone to worry about beyond, you know, making payroll and other things that are certainly critical. Nellie, yeah, great, great suggestion. And Nellie's comment about following up privately for feedback, I think that's really critical because people don't always share in groups. And sometimes it may not be you that the person would be comfortable talking with. So I would also offer, I would try to meet individually one-on-one and make people comfortable sharing, but I would also offer as a alternative, someone else that they might feel more comfortable with. But Nellie, that's a great suggestion. Any other challenges? or things you want to raise? Cool. It's a little after 2. And, you know, I want to say, first of all, I feel for everyone. We're all struggling with this. Some of us about making payroll and not laying off people and keeping our rent, and some of us with dealing in large organizations and being a small cog in a gigantic machine. We have all kinds of different challenges that we're facing. We are in it together. We are, you know, there is a community here, whether it's through Built Environment Plus or Building Green and their cohorts of groups. Don't be alone. Take care of yourself, take care of your stress, take care of your physical needs, take care of your kids, your dogs, your whatever. Don't forget to take care of yourself and give yourself what you need. And if we can be of help to anyone, just reach out, and I'm happy to you know, be there for you and talk through any of these things in more detail. And good luck and stay healthy. There will be a link. We'll follow up with a link to this recorded webinar sometime within the week if you want to pass it on to anyone else or whatever you need. So stay healthy. Thanks again to Building Green, Built Environment Plus, who has amazing 4 o'clock town meeting today and amazing programs online. And hopefully we'll see you on the other side, thriving.